Welcome everyone to our Jupiter retrograde in Virgo class tonight. You can see on your screen Jupiter went retrograde January 7th through May 9th of 2016. Went retrograde just past 23 Virgo and it goes direct just past 13. Before we get started with tonight's information, first of all, our housekeeping slides. Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts that we provide. You can subscribe to the Astro Library, and you can enroll in our multimedia course. Here's an extra slide of details on our Astro Library. This is over a dozen years of materials by myself and other evolutionary astrologers, divided into 3 different sections. You can enroll or subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. And this is the depository of all of our materials as time goes by. Here's our multimedia course, the 3 different segments that we have. We currently offer segments 1 and 2, available digital only, all of the materials in DVDs, or the combination of digital and material. And so again, what we're going to be working with here tonight is Jupiter's annual retrograde this year in Virgo. And as I put together all my materials and prepped them, I had the intuitive hit to share a little prayer that I developed for myself that I have shared from time to time with everybody as you see it on the screen. I have natal Pluto early degrees Virgo, so I really can resonate to the archetype of Virgo, for both its natural expression and its distortions. And I thought, okay, I made this prayer up for myself to say before I worked with any clients. And so I'm just going to say it for you right now. And if you all want to, you're welcome to just take a breath, relax, close your eyes if you want. It's simple and short, as you can see here. Spirit of God Goddess, come through me. Mind of God Goddess, speak through me. Heart of God Goddess, love through me. Body of God Goddess, I am. Now, if you would like, you can replace the word me with us and the word I with we are. If you'd like to say it in plural, sometimes I say this multiple ways with myself and with others, but I thought it might be relevant to our themes tonight to remember to just invoke source energy all the way through Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo, because with that polarity in Pisces, this is what it's pointing us towards. Reconnecting with source energy versus caught up in this material overwhelm and crises and manifestations, etc. Here is the chart for when Virgo went retrograde. This class is being recorded when? January 13th, 2016. So Jupiter's been reversing for about a week here. It went retrograde January 7th, 9:40 p.m. Mountain Standard Time in Rapid City where I live. Now you'll notice the spiritual T-square going on with Jupiter, Chiron, and Saturn that we spoke about. Neptune, Venus and Neptune are drawn in. But look at this little detail right here for you. The moon was in an exact square by degree and minute to the nodes of itself at the moment in space-time that Jupiter went retrograde. And so when I drew up this Now, I'm still going to call it an ingress chart for when Jupiter reversed directions, and I saw that exact square of its own nodes with the moon. I went, ooh, this is interesting. Pisces polarity, water sign, moon, ruling Cancer in 4th house, water, led me to feel that emotional themes are going to be present all the way through this Jupiter retrograde. And are we going to go to the extremes of that victim-victor, the sadomasochism? Or are we going to invoke the ability to heal ourselves, and in healing ourselves, to heal everyone around us, sending out that type of vibratory energy in our world? So you can see again, not only is this spiritual T-square so highly activated by several planets in the chart, we also have moon exactly square its own nodes. You don't see that happen very often on the moments that planets turn stationary retrograde. So this is what led me to use my little invocation of the prayer that I had created, remembering to just take deep breaths and feel our way through any Jupiter retrograde and Virgo crises. Here is all of the highlights that Jupiter has with the Sun during its retrograde cycles. You can see that the conjunctions were 3 Virgo to 3 Libra. Mercury actually Jupiter entered its pre-shadow in October, the degree where it goes stationary direct. So October through the 7th, this was the pre-shadow. Here's the actual retrograde. Here's the highlight of Jupiter retrograde. Excuse me if I say Mercury more than once. As Leroy said, we have Mercury retrograde January 5th through the 25th, and Jupiter retrograde on the 7th, so I can feel that energy coming through of Mercury retrograde as well. Here's where Jupiter goes direct, May 9th, and here is its post-shadow all the way to August when it passes over the stationary retrograde point again. So as we move into those outer planets, of course, long pre-post shadows, we don't pay too much attention to them when we just work with planetary retrogrades of 4 or 5 months. However, those shadows are still there. And if you have planets between 13 to 23 degrees of any sign, you're going to be feeling those aspects 3 times during the pre-shadow, the retrograde, and the post-shadow. And of course, all the retrograde highlights are either the conjunction or oppositions to the Sun. Briefly, Jupiter astronomy, revolution around the Sun in zodiac, just shy of 12 years. Jupiter's retrograde 4 months a year, or 38% of the year. Its retrograde period is 140 days, and it stands still, stationary, turning retrograde or direct for 5 days. Interesting tidbit that we all kind of recognize probably about Jupiter, with it having a 12-year cycle, and there being the 12 astrological archetypes of the zodiac, there is a possibility that perhaps this was the origin of the 12 signs, because every time Jupiter reaches its opposition to the Sun during its retrograde, it has moved eastward by about 30 degrees every single year, which turns out to be the width of a zodiacal sign. And as we know, that 30 degrees can be divided into 360, and we get 12. So I'm just curious about this. I've always wondered, how far back do we go with the 12 signs? Does anybody really know where they came from? We know that our ancestors created those 12 constellations that go around the band of the ecliptic. However, it's quite possible that they made the correlation with Jupiter as well, traveling more or less through 30 degrees of that 360 every year, and traveling more or less through one of those constellations or signs of the zodiac. So, little tidbit for you there. Jupiter, of course, is the largest planet in our solar system. It is one of the gas giants. It has a mass 2.5 times bigger than all other solar system planets combined. And as a matter of fact, we could take 1,000 planet Earths and fit it in Jupiter. It is the third brightest planet in the night sky after Moon and Venus. It rotates on its axis half of the time that it takes us on planet Earth. In other words, it has a 10-hour day versus the 24 hours on planet Earth. Jupiter has 67 moons and counting. 50 of them are official, the rest are unofficial yet. Has 4 large moons that are called the Galilean Moons because you can see 4 of its largest moons at night with a basic telescope. It also has the great red spot that I don't have a bright picture of it here. I had it on the title. The great red spot is a storm that's on the surface of Jupiter, and that storm alone is larger than planet Earth. Here are the dates that Jupiter is in Virgo. August 11th, 2015 through September 9th, 2016. Here are all of the previous Jupiter in Virgo cycles. So as you're working through this retrograde cycle and seeing where it is active in your chart, remember, not to the same degrees 13 to 23 Virgo, but these are the Jupiter in Virgo dates. You can look back 2003, 4, 1991, 92, 79, 80, and you can look back further and further here to see what was actually going on in your world through these Jupiter cycles. When we take a cycle like Jupiter that moves fast enough that we live through several of them, it can be helpful to reflect upon these previous cycles to get some themes of what was going on in your life. How have you evolved, Jupiter, since then? Did you have crises going on during these time periods? Did you make changes in your work and resources environment? Did you make changes in your belief systems here? So just a few of the themes that you can reflect upon through these dates here. Briefly, the archetype of Jupiter is the same as Sagittarius and the 9th house. Jupiter rules the sign Sagittarius. It rules the 9th house. This entire archetype, the planet sign and house, it is the active polarity, energy moving outward. It is the mutable, adaptable, changeable modality of action, and it is the fire spirit element. So Jupiter is that principle of growth, assimilation, expansion. It is our right brain, intuition, sixth sense. It is what we would call natural laws in the universe or the cosmological understanding of the universe. It is religious and spiritual philosophies. It represents the teacher or guru. I like this Jeffrey Green quote because I think it just really helps us understand the principle of Jupiter Sag 9th. The fundamental laws or principles are the same for all individuals or cultures, but are conceived, conceptualized, and expressed in a diversity of cultural and individual ways. For example, 3,500 organized religions, more or less, on planet Earth today, from the universal natural spiritual laws and principles concept. This archetype will relate to the future It will deal with honesty versus lies, integrity versus exaggeration, authenticity versus compensating. It will include alienation lessons from others in order to have us expand our natural understandings of ourself and our world. It includes language and communication lessons. And here is something that we don't always think of with Jupiter. It includes lessons of loss that then create the space to grow and expand into. Jupiter will also include those lessons of excess, whereas Jupiter is growth, Saturn is decay. And the two have a natural planetary pair to keep the cycle of growth and decay in balance. Jupiter retrograde in Virgo, here are some of the themes that all of us will be working through regardless of where the house manifestation of this retrograde is. If you want to, you can take some of these principles and put them into that house. Here, as Jupiter is moved from Leo to Virgo, we are working for this entire year, shifting from the pyramid reality complex, which is the Aries to Leo, egocentric, and here I am right at the top in Leo, to the inverted pyramid reality. This is Virgo. Everything turns topside down. We realize that the world doesn't revolve around us anymore, and it is the transition archetype that leads us into the second half of the zodiac and an egocentric orientation, meaning being able to move outside of ourselves and consider others more and more and more, from one-on-one to the entire picture. So as Jupiter goes retrograde, it will trigger this need to throw things upside down and to really have a closer look at ourselves and the egoic parts of ourselves and how that needs to be adjusted and evolved. So just think of where Jupiter is manifesting in your natal chart by house and think, where can I be egocentric? Where can I be full of myself? And how do I have to adjust that? For instance, let's just say that Jupiter retrograde in Virgo is happening in the 8th house. This may be someone who sees themselves as more important than the partner in a committed relationship. And they're really having to orientate towards that other person. This can be someone who, 8th house could be dealing with resource situations and perhaps have a little bit of inflation when it comes to resources and has to balance it out. Or relative to Virgo being related to inferiority complex, they can feel unworthy of resources. And Jupiter retrograde is throwing off that distortion of unworth and having them really reach for Pisces polarity second house, greater self-worth, especially on deep spiritual levels, that then allows more manifestation to come. So everything can go multiple directions here. These are examples of a theme here. We're going to work with deepening intuition in order to understand how to be of service to others. This is a Virgo archetype right here, service to others. Jupiter deepening the intuition in how to do that, whether it's individually to another person, including ourselves, our community, our groups, our cultures that we're involved in, or service to the whole, largest pictures we can understand. So Jupiter retrograde in Virgo is going to throw off false notions of how it means to be of service to another. We're not looking for lip service. We're not looking for, let me give you what I think you need, coming off of Leo. We're really having to intuitively understand how it is to really serve someone and what it is that they really may need from us versus what we want to give them. For instance, if you have Jupiter in Virgo moving through the first house, we'll get those intuitive sparks of how to help one another, but first house, they will again be so orientated from our own perspective, and Jupiter retrograde will point to that Pisces polarity in the 7th, and that's going to be that opportunity to really step outside of first house self and listen to that other person, to receive the intuitive hits around them, to hear what they're saying beyond any words they may say to us. And so this service to the others in general, again, Jupiter in Virgo is realizing the universe does not revolve around us. And this is going to be accelerated during its retrograde. The distortions of this is becoming very inwardly and or outwardly critical of others if it pushes security buttons when we recognize we're no longer the center of the universe, our world, as we've been trying to put it together. So again, Jupiter in Virgo wants to pierce self-importance and move towards equality. Now, I'd like to say here, and I'll probably say this multiple times, this is relating to the self-importance from Aries through Leo. We also can have the distortions of Virgo, in which again we have the inferiority, and we have to pierce the less than bubbles, Jupiter retrograde in Virgo, if we're orientated in that direction. And then we have to stand up for ourselves. Pisces polarity will have to believe in ourselves enough to go, wait a minute, this doesn't quite work this way. I need to have fairness in my relations with you as well. I need to have equal giving and receiving in some way. So again, because Jupiter goes sign through sign, and the sign before is what came before, we'll relate the current sign to what came before. Jupiter in Leo evolved for a year. Creativity, that sense of self-actualization. And from those creative sparks and ideas, Jupiter in Leo was a double fire signature. Now we're having to get into all of the detail work that must be done. We must put one foot in front of the other and make the effort. And what can happen here, retrograde, is we can resist the effort. We can go into increased crises mode or overwhelm over everything that we think needs to be done. And with that Pisces polarity, it becomes very important. Just go back to that prayer that I had right at the beginning. When we get to that overwhelm, can you close your eyes and take a deep breath? Spirit of God, Goddess, come through me. And you can say, Mind of God, Goddess, speak through me, discern through me, analyze through me. Bringing in again the Piscean whole when we get overwhelmed with all of the work that we have to do. So we're learning a balance between, yes, we've got to put one foot in front of another. Yes, Virgo is about work, but it's got to be balanced with that Pisces polarity of the larger picture and evolving what that larger picture is to prioritize the work from overwhelm to a natural step-by-step process. I always like to say, take the mountain and how can you move it into molehills and go through one molehill and then another and then another. And when you get to overwhelm, you got to step back, look at that big mountain again, and break it down all over again. And this is going to be continually changing through Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo, because all of the detailed process that we thought we had aligned is going to change. Now, this can easily happen through the typical work environment, the typical career environment. But what if you got the famous pink slip and now you're looking for work? Can you put as much effort into Pisces polarity, your self-worth, and your relationship to source energy as you are in brushing up your resume or going and filling out the job applications or creating your own business if that's what's there for you to do at this point? So a lot of shifting will come through that work environment, and there's going to be a balance between what is ours to do and what is not ours to do. That's the sign Libra that's coming after Virgo, tipping its toe into this story that we are weaving. And we also then are looking at what is our role to the universe, Pisces, serving Virgo Pisces, broadest sense Pisces. Where is it that we have to self-improve, which is another way of looking at sacrifice, through working and serving and helping others. So while it may take place in the world of work and career, in a broader sense, it's just going to be fine-tuning our relationships with others on any and all levels. So we have to look at self-improvement and sacrificing to our own greater self. Then we have to look at how to do that to another one-on-one. And again, then it extends outward, 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 all the way out to the broadest sense. How can I be of service to planet Earth? What is my volunteer work? One of the things that, looking back to those cycles, no, this would have been Jupiter in Leo, possibly Jupiter in Cancer for me. I remember when I first made my first website, and I wrote my monthly forecast. And then when I could no longer manifest those details, I evolved into speaking my forecast. But my point is back in my earliest days of starting into my astrology, for me, I thought, I want to work along the whole financial spectrum. I want to do the giveaways that are free, all the way up to the clientele and my teaching. And so I've always kept that spectrum out there. And I'm not saying that sacrificing self is about giving yourself away. There has to be a balance with that. If you sacrifice yourself too much with this signature, you're going to run into burnout. You're going to have the mental breakdowns. And so you have to balance recharging your own batteries in learning how you're going to evolve serving another, serving the greater whole, serving planet Earth. Now, what we're going to typically have here is we can easily have resistance to following through and taking care of the details. Jupiter is not all that comfortable in Virgo. Jupiter ruling that right brain wants the big picture. And Virgo rules all the minutiae of the details and organizing them forwards, backwards, inside, out, you name it. And so there is a certain amount where with the retrograde in Virgo, it's about throwing off the minutiae and the details that do not serve us or someone else. But we've all got to be careful of just wanting to throw off details in general and making an effort in general. This retrograde is about fine-tuning the effort and how we make it. For me, prepping for this class, I like to put everything together as best as possible. Then I like to take a break and walk away from it and then come back and kind of get a little fresh look at it to see if there's something else to follow through on. That's Jupiter retrograde in Virgo Pisces. And so make an effort on whatever it is that you just would like to throw off and toss away. And do I really have to be bothered? Make the effort and then give yourself that stepping back, larger picture Pisces polarity, and then come back in and say, how do I improve it? Now, we'll do this in the area of work. We'll do this in the area of service to others in the universe. And we do this in relationship to our own self-improvement process, whatever that may be. There's an ebb and flow now as Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo between detail, larger picture, detail, larger picture, detail, larger picture. And we're just going to go through ebb and flow that way, back and forth. Jupiter in Virgo tends to create a crisis orientation towards life. And through that year-long transit, it can emphasize crises. It can bring crises to a head. And as it now goes retrograde in Virgo, the purpose is to throw off crises. And again, Pisces polarity, larger picture, that allows us to bring in some level of simplification or prioritizing. One of the most natural purposes of crises is to change, to evolve. And what we have a tendency to do is make that intention to change, and yet as soon as the crisis is over, we're right back into our same procrastinating, excuse-making, old patterns again and again and again. Jupiter retrograde here gives us the energy to continue to make the effort however many times necessary and break this old pattern. So what is it you must do for yourself moment by moment? What is it you must do for yourself day by day? You have an extra edge and push with Jupiter retrograde here. It's going to reveal all of these crisis patterns, and it may reveal them in new ways. It can be just the repetitious pattern. Okay, I have known this one for as long as I have been aware of myself, says Pluto Virgo generation. And yet, here is one more time, once every 12 years, that we can see these patterns and break them. One of the best ways of breaking it is to be able to understand why we have this pattern. And many times the why is all around the inverted pyramid and the inferiority complex. I'm not worthy of. Oh, I was such a bad person in a bad life. Oh, I was a bad mommy. I've been a bad wife. I've been a lazy worker, surfing on my computer rather than getting my work done, blah, 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 blah. if you can understand the why, it's going to come down to something about that inverted pyramid and something about not feeling worthy of, less than. And the Pisces polarity is allowing us to have that reconnection with source energy, warts, farts, and all, as I like to say, that then allows deepening understandings, Jupiter, of those whys, and make the effort to change it, change it, change it. In other words, can you breathe through any crises that come up in your life? Okay, if you physically feel like you're gonna hyperventilate or you're gonna lose it, or you just can't move because you're so sucked into the guilt, can you breathe? Can you breathe? And again, you can repeat my invocation. Spirit of God, Goddess, come through me. Mind of God, Goddess, speak through me. Heart of God, Goddess, love through me. Body of God, Goddess, I am. And you breathe the peace into you. And we are always working between left brain, right brain with Jupiter in general and with Jupiter in a left brain sign, Virgo, that's ruled by Mercury. Throughout the year of Jupiter and Virgo, we can go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain, until we just feel like we're, running in circles. And so, when we have the retrograde, it points towards right brain, whole brain, Pisces. There is a relief valve when Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo. And one more time, searching for that deeper meaning whenever the crisis appears. What we have to watch out for here is, with this retrograde, we can just, expand the switching back and forth without any sense of balance. But to recognize that, sometimes it can be just as simple as getting out and taking a walk, or meditating, or getting on your elliptical, whatever it is that gets you in movement. Jupiter growth, expansion, getting you to move, that can be one of the ways that you can have a break from this energy when it just wants to go back and forth and have no grounding to it whatsoever. What we have to recognize here is, in general, Pisces is the potential for perfection, but the big, big word is potential. And Virgo is that utter awareness of the lack of perfection. And Jupiter is also then recognizing the process to perfect. And that's what we can do with this retrograde cycle. As we become aware of all those inferiority complexes, we want to then look at those ways in which we can make the effort. If you've been a follower of me, you will recognize this one. I don't care how many times you fall off the bicycle. What counts more is that you get back up on the bike and pedal again. No matter how many times you fall off the diet, you try again to improve your food intake. This Jupiter retrograde in Virgo could be an excellent time period to have a spiritualization process with nutrition. Instead of nutrition, Jupiter and Virgo, how many of you can relate to this? You eat at your desk at work instead of taking the lunch break. I have a sister with 3 planets in Virgo, and she's well known for this one. And I'm like, well, I don't care how many hours you work. You get an hour lunch. It's the law. Can you get yourself to take it? Can you change your relationship with food? This could be a real important concept in learning to nurture the temple of the soul, i.e. the body. And that is that process to perfecting on a physical level. How is it that you need to do it on an emotional level? Moon square its own nodes when Jupiter went retrograde. How do you need to do it mentally? How do you need to do it spiritually? Because, as we said, Jupiter and its rulership of Sag in the 9th house is understanding the larger picture of cosmology, religion, spirituality. And when we put Jupiter in Virgo, we get all of the patriarchal distortions that have been imprinted and re-imprinted through the last 2,000 years of the Piscean age, going back probably 8,000 years since the patriarchy arose. You most likely are familiar with the sadomasochistic patterns. The sadism is guilt linked to anger. I'm going to hurt you. Masochism is guilt linked to atonement. I must suffer. So, we are either going to re-imprint those patterns, Jupiter and Virgo, or we're going to break free. And what is the most beautiful, beautiful blessing of this retrograde cycle? It gives us the opportunity to throw it off. It gives us the opportunity to break free from these old patterns. Now, you probably know this, but just in case somebody's not aware of it, Virgo can be both the sadist and the masochist. Pisces can be both the sadist and the masochist. Probably easy to understand Virgo getting into that inner outer criticism as and the sadistic energy and actions that can come from that. But when Pisces is the sadist, there's no compass. There's no morality. There's no guiding spiritual system. So Pisces, as the last of the 12 archetype, can be the sadist, the most sadistic of the sadists. And you can flip that around and have both the same thing going on. So, in my perspective, there isn't a one of us that doesn't have sadomasochistic distortions in our world. And that's even more emphasized if you have planets in Virgo or Pisces, and to a great extent, Gemini and Sag, the squares to that. So how are you becoming aware of more subtle levels of where you do the sadomasochistic thing? Are you bought up into all of the conditioned guilt? In Jupiter and Virgo, you just beat the holy bejeebies out of yourself. Can you break that old pattern? Where do you get caught up into over-sacrificing to others? Can you break that pattern? Again, the Pisces polarity is learning self-forgiveness, learning forgiveness of others with healthy boundaries, learning to see that larger picture that then allows you to understand your roles, your karma, even your past life karmas. This could be a time period in which to meditate on those past lives or do some past life therapy work to really become aware of some of those patterns and how you can break them. Here's a slide I took from my Jupiter and Virgo series because I felt this really emphasized this archetype. Jupiter, that if, one beer's good, 5 beers is better. If one potato chip's good, 5 is better. If hiking or running 3 miles is good, I'm going to go 30 miles. So everything can go to excess and extreme, both good and bad. And one of the things that we've really got to be able to handle with Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo is balance. Balance, balance, balance. And that is what the Pisces polarity is trying to help us understand. Now, I'm going through those archetypes. Sometimes I have to mix up how I teach these classes just for myself. So I put my little slides that I tend to show here after talking to you through a lot of these Virgo retrograde archetypes. Why do we have planetary retrogrades? The principle of psychological compensation is being out of sync with your own true nature. Compensation is Jupiter in general, by the way, although this is true for any planetary retrograde. And almost all of us, regardless of our evolutionary state of consciousness, compensate in some way in order to appear normal or get along with the group or the consensus. And we look for compensations wherever we have a sense of dissatisfaction or frustration. That's the natural feeling thought that comes up when we're not being authentic with ourselves. Now, you can look to see what that status quo or normal with the consensus is with any planetary archetype by looking at where it is by sign and house, its aspects. Of course, you bring in the evolutionary state and the environmental conditionings. And then, when the planet goes retrograde, this is the opportunity to break free of those compensations. We can break the patterns. And when we do that, it's about aligning with your own individual natural law versus what consensus or culture or society says. Now, planetary retrogrades are always a geocentric or earth-centered phenomena of apparent motion. The planetary archetype is always stronger because it's closest to Earth when it's retrograde, regardless of the planet. Mercury through Pluto, retrograde. And it causes a withdrawal from that status quo to, again, redefine any planetary archetype to natural law. When that planet is retrograde, the archetype is non-static. It's continually breaking up, shifting, changing. You know all the re-words with retrogrades. Review, re-evaluate, rethink, reprocess, redo, blah, blah. So, sign and house of wherever you have Jupiter in Virgo will define how the retrograde is manifesting. And the opposite sign and house will give clarity and expression to how Jupiter and Virgo self-improvement, service, evolving your relationships with the world is meant to be expressed for you. Here's a visual. When Jupiter's retrograde, it's outside of Earth. And from our Earth-centered viewpoint, you can look and you can see any outer planetary retrograde. Here's the pre-shadow. Here's where it takes, in Jupiter's case, 23 to 13 degrees. And then here's post-shadow, and it moves on again. I also had to put this one in also from my series on Jupiter and Virgo. This is, to me, is so specific to Jupiter and Virgo with the Pisces polarity, and this is what it's all about during the retrograde. What people resist the most about spiritually healing is changing their minds. What are all of the mental Virgo cliches and self-talk going on in your head. That part of your mind that's just always continually running and thinking and analyzing and processing. What is it about all of that that needs to be thrown off? If you wanted to do a Virgo process and a Virgo effort, just carry around a piece of paper, or in today's world, the note section on your smartphone. I use that one a lot. Just write down every time you catch yourself thinking, stating something that is negative in regards to yourself. You can do the same thing in regards to what you think about the world. You can make one list, you can make two lists. Here's how I'm negative with myself, here's how I'm negative with the world. Make the list. And in that process of making that list, then write the corresponding healing affirmation. And the healing affirmations, I always like to say, must be first person and present tense. First person and present tense. You want to talk about really becoming conscious of how you are inwardly, outwardly critical, and how you can throw that off. Just, again, do the Virgo thing and put it down on paper, and then use it through this retrograde cycle to access all of those Piscean affirmations to make the changes. You can even do this in regards to Jupiter, the principle of growth and expansion. What would you like to see changing in your world? And whether it manifests instantly or not is secondary. But it gives Jupiter some perspective on how it wants to evolve, how it wants to expand, how it wants to grow. Here's a few slides on this Pisces polarity, just to recap this a little more. It's about understanding the whole picture, the largest picture we can make sense of. Show me the truth source. Help me to understand. And then consistently, Virgo, making the effort, Virgo, to move towards this larger picture. And Pisces, it's always about understanding the whole is greater than the parts that make it up. Virgo will never be able to dissect it and analyze it enough to figure out all the parts and pieces. That's when we get into overwhelm. That's when we get into confusion, disillusion, depression, all of those types of things. That when the world collapses and we collapse in upon ourselves, when our outer world doesn't work anymore, that's leading us into that intuitive whole that allows Source to spark through us and help us expand and understand. It leads us into what we call that faith and trust in the universe. That then allows us to move forward on that gut instinctive level. Any of you remember Jeffrey Green's teachings about the archetype of Pisces, Neptune, and the 12th house? It's like being in a tiny little rowboat in the middle of the ocean, and it is cloudy and foggy, and there's no shore in sight, and you have the only thing you can do is go inward and then move forward and row your oars by what your gut says, not what Jupiter and Virgo's head is. This is the leading edge right here now through this retrograde. It also, though, because Pisces is the last archetype, It's about throwing off old desires, old dreams, old fantasies that no longer serve our soul. And again, the depression, the disillusionment, the distortions that come along with Pisces, the dissolving something and moving it away, that's the tool, that's the catalyst to throw off old desires. That's that opening up the space that we talked about with Jupiter's association with loss. Yes, we may replace it with a new desire, and yes, we may replace it with a new separating desire, because we need to naturally exhaust the separating desires. But what is it that Jupiter is trying to create that just doesn't work for us anymore? How can we throw that off? How can we continue to put one foot in front of another with diet, exercise, and rest and work? Excuse my burp there, while we're throwing this old stuff off. This Pisces polarity also is asking us to have an increasing awareness of our mind-body connection. And I use the word mind-body because it's easy to understand, but the more correct term would be metaphysical, physical connection. What is the energy behind manifestation? And anytime you're dealing with planetary archetypes through Virgo Pisces, you can have weird and mysterious manifestations of illness and self-healings, which are called miracles. Now, again, Virgo can have all of the nerves and stress and all the mental things. You notice how with all of the gun violence on planet Earth, we're really starting to understand that a lot of the gun violence issues are mental health issues. And other countries that actually have universal health care may include some of the mental stuff within that. But here in the United States, we haven't really funded mental health issues for about 3-4 decades now. And so a lot of them end up either homeless on the streets, or they end up in prisons, which substitute as mental institutions, Pisces institutions. So we'll have the expanding awareness of this stuff. But some of my point here is anytime something's not quite right in the body, you've got to go to the source. And with this retrograde, you have that ability to get that whole, to get that metaphysical or energetic source that manifests the illness or dis-ease. And you also have that opportunity. The Pisces polarity is about a reconnect with source energy, to be able to have that reconnection with source. And when you have that, then you get the spontaneous healings. Then you get the miracles that come place. Now, many of you might be familiar with this. Pisces operates through those cycles of confusion and clarity. They're not predictable in their timing or their duration, but the confusion cycle is always related to the past. It can include all of these Piscean words here: alienation, disassociation, disillusionment, meaninglessness, ultimate depression. The purpose is to remove what's no longer working in life and align personal will with divine will. The clarity cycle is about the future moving forward. Renewal, faith, inspiration, bliss, devotion, renewing that relationship with divine. This is all activated through Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo. Virgo can get so much into the details and the work and the perfection and the effort and doing this and doing that and doing this and doing that. And the Pisces polarity again is where we can just step back, prioritize, see that larger picture. Can you make peace with any confusion cycle, any depression, any loss of motivation? There are divine words and understandings that will come through in those time periods. What would you have me know, Source? What would you have me know? What would you have me know? What would you have me understand? What would you have me do? So sometimes Virgo goes into the overwork. Sometimes it's underwork. Both of those extremes need to go the other direction. If you become the couch potato, get off the couch and take a walk. If you go round and round and round and round and round in circles trying to do it 10 times, let it go. Balancing those two extremes will help you move towards the Pisces polarity through any confusion or letdown part. Now, when anything in our life no longer serves a purpose, and we do have to release it, we do have to let it go, it's not always replaced. And we have to be comfortable in that void. And the Pisces polarity is the void. And Jupiter retrograde in Virgo can, all of us, from time to time, will have to deal with the void. Maybe it's only a few hours or a few days or a few weeks. Maybe it's the entire Jupiter retrograde cycle. Who knows? But that void is where you quiet. That's where you search for source. That's where you ask. That's where you question. That's where you recognize ego doesn't run the show. Well, we have a tendency to do that Jupiter fear of loss, fill it up, fill it up, fill it up, fill it up. And yet, that fear of loss and filling it up can sometimes be putting in another separating desire that really doesn't serve us. Because ego always wants to try and fill a void. Nature wants to fill a void, but the separating forces are going to come in and try and fill the void with a separating desire. Can you talk to returning forces through the void? I am okay. It is all right to breathe. It is all right to have this space and this quietness for source to come through. Finally, I just wanted to say that if we look at all, this is not a complete list, but here's some words that easily relate to distortions of Pisces. And just because we're looking at the polarity point of a planetary retrograde doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be goody two-shoes natural expressions. We can all find ourselves going into these areas from time to time. But if we can, like I just said on the previous slide, if we can just remember that Pisces, Neptune, 12th house is to bring the exhaustion of a separating desire, a surrender to universal source, or I will, my will, divine will. When we touch base with that, then Jupiter and Virgo can get in touch with how it really wants to expand, evolve, how it really wants to make any Virgo effort in our world. There is so much progress that we can make on a soul basis through Jupiter and Virgo, especially if we utilize the retrograde and tune into I will, mine will, divine will. I will, my will, divine will. You can just repeat that mantra, not even necessarily understanding or knowing which way it's going to take you. You don't have to know. You're not in charge. Source is in charge. You're just saying, show me the way. I will, my will, divine will, show me the way. I will, my will, divine will. What would you have me know? You get my point. So here again, one more time, is the synodic cycle of the Jupiter retrograde, and these dates of the retrograde in red, the shadows. The highlight of the retrograde cycle is March 8th at 1818 Pisces. Here is the chart of the opposition. Again, the aha point, the time period of what we've just talked about to get those Piscean moments of clarity. This is the time period when Jupiter's opposing Sun and shining the light of day, March 8th. Mountain time where I live, it's 3:57 in the morning. So it's in the morning on March 8th if you're in the United States. You can see here that Jupiter is, even though it's retrograde, it's still with an orb conjuncting the North Node, reviewing how we want to move forward. Saturn's an orb of the T-square. Look at the Piscean onslaught. And what I really want to point out to you, at the time of the retrograde, here is a Moon-Neptune conjunction. Again, remember I said when Jupiter went retrograde, I didn't do the chart for stationary direct. I just pop it in. Little Virgo detail. But Moon was square the nodes when it went retrograde. Here's Moon conjunct Neptune and in orb of all of this stuff. But we also have a solar eclipse, March 8th, in the evening, 1856 Pisces. So here they are, opposite at 1818, and then Moon catches up to 1856, and we have the solar eclipse. Solar eclipses, Sun eclipses Moon, and so we might lose touch with that emotional energy, but we would really want to be concentrating. I always like to, on solar eclipse, still think of them as new moons. And they're more potent new moons. Are we paying attention to our emotional new beginnings as the moon is eclipsed? Full moons is objectivity and awareness. And can we see both sides of the picture even when, sun eclipse, solar eclipse, moon eclipse, lunar eclipse? You got my Mercury retrograde syntax there. You know what I meant when I was talking about this. So this Jupiter-Sun opposition will be strong, and we're going to have to be very, very careful of this Piscean onslaught and falling into those distorted archetypes of powerlessness and futility, and what difference does it make, and I'm so disappointed, and I don't have any faith in the world, and I can't trust it, and Every time you find yourself going through those words, use this North Node, Jupiter retrograde, and as we say in Leroy's family with our handicapped nephew who can't pronounce his first syllable, odd omet. And for us, it just means I'm claiming my power. I recognize this, and I'm going to find a way to go forward through my frustrations. In other words, we're trying not to swear. And me, as we joke around on this word with our 10-year-old nephew, and we're like, uh-oh, got to change languaging, Weimers. But Leroy and I like to play with words and put different meanings on them because it shakes up the brain and it makes us think versus falling into the same old patterning. Here's Jupiter and the inner planets. All three of them have oppositions, Sun, Mercury, Venus, to Jupiter retrograde in Virgo. So here again, really searching for that deeper connection. Honor ourself and the divine versus the sadomasochistic distortions. Intuition can really open up here versus all that South Node energy. and it's very activated by this solar eclipse. But not only that, look at March. Look at the aspects that are happening in March as we have a South Node eclipse season. While Jupiter's on the North Node, Sun's on the South Node in Pisces. And here were those three interplanetary oppositions. Here's the solar eclipse. Here is the lunar eclipse, the only thing that moves outside of Virgo Pisces. And we'll talk more on this real briefly. Jupiter this year has 4 aspects to the outer planets, and each of the middle aspects are coming, look at this, February 23rd to March 25th. Everything is in March except the second opposition to Chiron. But the retrograde aspect to the 4 outer planets are happening smack dab. It's the lines in black right here. So you can see how potent the month of March is. Again, the highlight of the retrograde cycle, the interplanetary awareness, the eclipses shaking it up emotionally. Use Jupiter conjunct that North Node. Use that pull. Invest that. You're throwing off the old Virgo distortions, but you don't want to go into the Piscean abyss. You want to rebirth North Node conjunct Jupiter retrograde in Virgo. You want to rebirth the Virgo archetype into natural expression. Gentle love with self. Taking care of that temple of the soul, the body. Really working to serve yourself and others. And then all of the Jupiter planetary aspects. We're going to go into those next for you. All right. Basically what this is the T-square. And this T-square, by the way, if you haven't noticed, is activated from the fall of 2015 through the fall of 2017. Even though most of the energy is here in March. And if you look at March of this year that I just showed you, all you see is the second Jupiter last quarter square. But you can see the potency of what's going on here in March. Here's all the aspects to the spiritual T-square. I'm only going to speak about the ones that Jupiter relates to. I'll speak about the Saturn ones to Neptune and Chiron when we have the Saturn retrograde. Saturn goes retrograde March 25th, which is when Venus has the opposition to Jupiter and right after the lunar eclipse. So I'll address that part of this spiritual T-square in detail. Moving on though, here's another slide that I had put together before. You can see right here, it's really Jupiter, Chiron by orb, but this is the chart for when, this is the summer solstice chart, but it is the moment that Jupiter conjuncts the North Node. This is after the Jupiter retrograde. Jupiter goes direct May 9th, remember, at 13 Virgo. Here's where Jupiter conjuncts the North Node. Whoops, get my thing right, and activates that. But this spiritual T-square, Jupiter's retrograde cycle, everything's potent. Oops, I didn't bring in the Mercury opposition, the Grand Cross that we have going on. So you can see that the spring equinox will be active with the eclipses in Jupiter. You can see that the summer solstice will be active. This could be a time period to intend everything that you've wanted to throw off and then replace and implement with Jupiter's retrograde cycle. This could be some initiation rites or progress observations, evaluations. in essence, with this T-square, Jupiter only had one opposition to Neptune, by the way, and that was back in September. Fall equinox. Interesting. In essence, as we look at this T-square, though, we have all kinds of old manifestations and realities fading away. There is a crisis theme in all areas of life, and the purpose again, to affect evolution. Lies could be exposed to understand new truths, but we could fall into those denial mechanisms. All the way through this T-square, we've got to re-examine belief systems. And it's going to be so easy for rigidity and fear of change to set in, especially on those consensus collective levels. And what we need is the open-mindedness to look forward and implement on a step-by-step process. Now, specifically, Jupiter's going to make 3 aspects each. Last quarter squares to Saturn, crises in consciousness, oppositions to Chiron, waxing inconjuncts, inner crises to Uranus, and waning trines, outer manifestations to Pluto in Capricorn. So Jupiter this year in Virgo, remember, emphasized with the retrograde in March, Jupiter's activating both the spiritual T-square and the Uranus-Pluto waxing square that we're still in orb with. So Jupiter is like taking that waxing square, which is the past and the new, fighting and struggling, crises in consciousness. And then in this year, 2016 being a 9-year, the spiritual T-square is trying to make sense of it all. Jupiter's the integration of it. Jupiter's integration and assimilation. So Jupiter is the key connector this year to these outer planets. The only one not involved is Neptune. You can bring Neptune in by association of sign with Chiron in Pisces and South Node in Pisces. But Jupiter's the integration. So you see how it emphasizes even more. What are the old manifestations and old realities to throw off? Jupiter retrograde in Virgo, old mental thought patterns. What are the new beliefs that you want to search for as you throw off the old beliefs? How do you find a new evolving foundation through all of the chaos that's being thrown up on planet Earth? Here's the last quarter squares. We've already had the first one. This is a cycle that started in Taurus in May of 2001, conjunction 23 Taurus. But last quarter squares are the crises in consciousness, what's no longer working in society. Remember growth decay? How are you in your own 20-year cycle looking at things that need to be reflected upon and released if necessary, or karmically addressed if that's what's necessary through the last quarter? These two can be activations of social uprisings. These last quarter squares can activate the Uranus-Pluto squares. What we really have to watch for is feeling like we're powerless. So when Jupiter's retrograde here in Pisces, what can you understand and then implement? Last quarter squares are about society. How do you want to be active in society? If you are in the United States, how are you going to be active in the presidential election? Which, by the way, any of you who followed my 2016 forecast, I so holy hope I'm wrong. And that, Bernie Sanders is the Democratic candidate. Oh my gosh, how many of us would that just, oh God, activate, spur, implement, So, this is about what is ours to do in society here. Individually, deeper meanings in any relationship that we're working through. Honoring the other party, being honest with them, searching to understand their perspective of truth, and how can we find any common ground. These last quarter squares, there's a lot of collective stuff that can go on. Let me address those. I did put the U.S. chart in here. I'll just wait just a moment till we get to the U.S. chart. Jupiter finally has its oppositions to Chiron, and I didn't look those up. I didn't put those in, and I don't know if I can access those easy. Chiron has real erratic cycles with the outer planets because of its elliptical cycle. But we've had the first opposition. As I said, this is the only one in February. The rest of all that March onslaught. Oppositions there's something that must be thrown off in order to reach a state of equality. So here we're really talking about choice points and awareness. Am I the victor or am I a co-creator? So this one points to old beliefs about victimization being thrown off, all the old mental patterns that go along with the sadomasochistic distortions of the patriarchy need to be thrown off here. This is opportunity for the collective to make adjustments. All kinds of social issues that can come up around this, especially around mental and physical health crises. This can spark social issues as well. The distortions of it, my God's better than your God, not wanting to throw off that old stuff, wanting to go to the sadomasochistic anger and fight. That's the oppositions distorting. It's me versus you, us versus them. It falls into that paralyzation, and we can fall into just tearing someone else apart, Jupiter and Virgo, and doing it through our own sense of feeling wounded, Chiron in Pisces, or our own sense of better than, less than, feeling better than, Chiron in Pisces, taking the spiritual know-it-all attitude. I still think that all the way through Jupiter's oppositions to Chiron, there's opportunities for new healing tools. I felt all the way through Jupiter and Virgo that there could be a mini renaissance of health and wellness, a mini renaissance of the metaphysical movement. That can still be there. We can all have some personal recognitions in those ways, in blah, blah, blah. You get my point. Perhaps there's healing modalities that no longer serve us and we open up to new ones. Perhaps there's healing modalities that we've known about for a while, but our awareness and understanding of them expands and broadens and takes on new roles. If you're in the United States, you know that this can have a lot to do with the whole Obamacare. If we would get Bernie Sanders as the Republican candidate, he's very strong on a one-payer universal healthcare system like every other developed country in the world. So stay tuned for that stuff to be more emphasized during this Jupiter retrograde. Jupiter to Uranus, here's the waxing in conjuncts. Next year, Jupiter has the oppositions with Uranus. Regardless of who gets in office, look for more polarities between liberals and conservatives. The polarities are not going to ease off until we are past the Uranus-Pluto squares and the early 20s, mid-20s, when transiting Pluto is new phase to the natal US Pluto. But here is personal adjustments that we need to make. That Virgo service to others during the retrograde, there's a review on how it is to serve ourselves and serve others best, and to make the adjustments as we need to. If we're on the masochistic victim end, the adjustment is standing up for ourselves. If we're on the victorizing sadistic end, we're going to have to make amends within ourselves and with others in some way. There's a strong, strong opportunity here if we make that effort, Virgo, to break free from a lot of old soul patterns. This is coming off of Uranus's waxing squares to Pluto and Uranus in Aries and the in waxing in conjuncts and Jupiter being able to reach over to some real deep objectivity about ourself. And this is just the combination of the planets and the signs, and you would want to make that effort. If you find yourself being critical inwardly, outwardly, if you find yourself going to extremes with freedom, lack of it, or not wanting to have any adjustments to it, this is where you're not utilizing these aspects. And when you have the second aspect where Jupiter's retrograde, this is the, again, aha moments for objectivity, how you need to change, how you need to adjust, how you need to balance that service with others, how you want to be active in your roles on planet Earth. Jupiter's aspects to Pluto, here's the good news. These are the waning trines, and they're in Earth signs, and they're really about some manifestations. If you look at Jupiter making last quarter squares to Saturn, and Saturn making last quarter squares to Neptune, if you've been making an effort through the first 3 quarters of those cycles, then Jupiter-Pluto can bring some rewards. And the waning trines, the 240 degrees in the last quarter phase, these are outer rewards. So any of those efforts that we've been making and what we make right now through Jupiter and Virgo can continue to come forth for us. We can really make some shifts. If you have to make those career changes, they can be a little bit easier this year because we have these waning trines. There's a lot of intuitive hits that can come through about our soul's desires. The old ones we need to let go, the evolving desires that are coming through, both separating and returning. And as you can see, some of the distortions that are possible, what you would want to be really working for is, what would you have me know, Source? And searching within your own soul for what makes you feel good, what makes you feel happy. Where is work presenting itself to you in making efforts? Can you find a peace and a balance with that? Can you find that larger Piscean understanding to help you through any work efforts that need to happen? In general, Jupiter and Virgo can have Many of us feeling overwhelmed with the day-by-day details of work. Retrograde, larger picture, to then come in and know how we prioritize the work, where we do make an effort and where we don't need to make the effort anymore. This is not mine to do anymore. This is not what is for my soul's highest and best good anymore. I let it go, or I find another way to do it differently. These two can be very intuitive about how to prioritize work, how to balance work and play. And the retrograde will emphasize the understanding of that. So I already showed, oops, wait a minute, I'm jumping ahead. Pluto and Virgo generation, these were those born between 56-57 to 1971-72. Jupiter retrograde from 23 to 13 will affect the souls with these dates. The very end of these, 62, 63, 69, 70, you'll chances are only get the conjunction of Jupiter over natal Pluto one time. Between 64, 68, you're going to have 3 hits. Yeah, you won't have 5. You'll have the 3 hits. So, this is a death and rebirth Pluto. And what's happening here are belief systems about ourselves and our role in the world. There's strong potential for soul renewals here and making any necessary adjustments that we need to. As we look at Jupiter's retrograde cycle and the Pisces polarity, it's the polarity point for our own souls that are being activated for this mini generation. So you've really got an ability to have some realignments, and the distortions would be your soul just feeling overwhelmed and it's just too much. The natural expressions and working with the energies will really be soul renewals. Wow, this is what I came here to do on planet Earth. From your own health and wellness and your own roles in the world to resources and career, all of those spectrums, you can really be making some effort to move forward. If you're in this generation and you work in the alternative, healing world, whether physically or spiritually or emotionally, mentally, in between, this is where you're really trying to recharge your batteries. What does make sense for me here? And you also have an excellent opportunity to see how all of the patriarchal conditionings of sadomasochism have affected your soul. Because any of those unconscious past life patternings will either be repeated or Jupiter conscious awareness, you're going to become aware of them. And the Pisces polarity, you're going to understand the larger picture to it and what it is that you need to change. And of course, releasing the conditioned guilt, making whatever efforts are necessary to atone the natural guilt, and of course, how well can you release old inner, outer critical patterning that goes to the depth of your soul with this generation. Here's where I had my Grand Cross. The nodal axis, of course, all it has is that conjunction. We'd already mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to include this one too because it just kind of recaps a lot here for us. The entire Jupiter cycle will emphasize the nodal axis. The retrograde will emphasize this even more. Am I a victim or a co-creator? Am I inclusive or exclusive? Am I in denial and escapism and avoidance, or am I grounding myself in my world? And of course, religion versus spirituality, human dominance versus equality, and serving, the balance of serving ourselves and serving others. Finally, I just wanted to bring up the U.S. chart here. I use the U.S. the Gemini rising one, which is the 2:13 a.m. for July 4th. This is the 9th house Pluto one in the 7-degree Gemini rising. Jupiter is going to have 3 waxing squares to Mars. It's going to have 3 conjunctions to Neptune. And as it's just went stationary retrograde, it is squatting right here on Neptune. So it really is shaking up beliefs quite a bit for everybody. And anytime we get caught up in fear, there's a tendency to just become very outwardly critical. So when you find yourself doing any of that inner or outer criticism, can you reflect back? And this is what we're trying to do for our entire country on a soul level. And of course, looking at how so much of the world is run by consensus, there is a real big truth versus lies going on here. Saturn is going to go into that 7th house. Pisces is going into the 11th, and so the Neptune has been last quarter squares to Uranus. This is manifesting into what we would know as the whole liberal versus conservative just being polarized. And what is the soul of this nation? Are we really inclusive of each other? Or do we fall into, the exclusiveness, reactivism that we have? My God better than your God. I just see us continuing to have a lot of soul searching and a lot of dichotomy, polarizations that are going on. And I think it's going to be quite interesting that this is a presidential election year, and while it's only for 4 years, so many times, and especially in today's economics, whoever we elect could easily, we could be looking at 8-year terms realistically. And so there's so much that's being brought up here. And these aspects are going to go on regardless of which July 4th chart you use, okay? So these themes of polarizing and truth versus lies and including versus excluding are so emphasized, and I think they'll continue to be emphasized as we move through the rest of the election. Now, Jupiter will have went into Libra by election day. Oh, I don't have my ephemeris handy here to look up where Jupiter is and see if it's activating this T-square right here by the time we get to the election day, which this year I think is November 8th. Somebody, if you type it in, if you can look it up for me, because I'm tied to my headset. But here were the dates of where Jupiter makes these waxing squares to the U.S. Mars in Gemini. And here are the dates where Jupiter has the conjunctions, and you can see that we've already had the 2. And we'll have the 3rd aspect in July. We'll have the conjunction in August. I think these would be around the times that we're having the party nominations. I just find that it's going to continue, I think, to be quite spirited, because we have an election that's going for the soul of the country, Jupiter, Neptune. And thank you for letting me use the U.S. chart, international attendees. The soul of the country. Are we going to swing right, Trump, or left, Sanders? And Jupiter square Mars, criticize, duality. That will just continue to take place here as it's going through. You get my point. These aspects are just emphasizing how the U.S. is really working through this spiritual T-square. And who is the real United States? Who are the real citizenry? It's almost like the leading edge of patriarchal versus matriarchal principles are being fought out through the United States right now. Because as the U.S. goes, so much of the world goes. Now we know that this is falling away somewhat in emphasis with Pluto and Capricorn, balsamic, this natal Pluto. But there's still a certain amount of the U.S. I mean, we're still a leader in the world. And we've got some real strong choice points going on. By the way, for those of you who don't know that, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the 130-some countries that get together with the United Nations, there's going to be a new Secretary General elected, and they're elected for 10-year terms. And there's a lot of talk going on about the fact that the 5 major countries, which is U.S., China, Russia, France, Britain, where they have to open up to the broader membership having some say in who is elected Secretary General. And, there's a lot that's coming up for rebirthing in the UN. The other thing that's happening in the UN right now is they're writing a new 15-year plan for how the United Nations is going to operate. What's its role going to be? Its peacekeeping missions are overly stretched. Where do we fall with LGBT issues? Where do we fall with women and protecting women? There's so many broad-based international issues that are being discussed, and new 15-year plan being made with the United Nations, that I think this spiritual T-square, again, Jupiter, Chiron oppositions with Saturn squeezed in, that throughout this year and even into next year is going to have a pretty strong emphasis on not only how the U.S. will go, but to some degree how the world will go. And because Jupiter is conscious beliefs, and Jupiter retrograde is throwing the conscious beliefs off, even on a collective level, we're searching for deeper, broader beliefs. And so what will be the baby steps forward for planet Earth through Jupiter retrograde? Stay tuned. All right. I haven't paid any attention to time. I did pretty good. Questions or comments from anybody on material? Anything that I did not remember to include? My medium, Leroy, is silent, so is he typing away or not listening to me? Leroy, if you're talking, you're not unmuted. Are we having a Mercury retrograde snafu?
Well, I got my headset going now. It was not completely plugged in, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
So good responses on the board, and thanks for all the work into this important Jupiter retrograde
Did
period.
anybody look in their ephemeris and tell me where Jupiter is on November 8th? Is it within orb of the Saturn? I mean, I've looked up the chart before and I've done a bi-wheel, but I didn't, Mercury retrograde details.
I tried to animate my time passages software, but it wouldn't work for me. It requested an upgrade, so I don't have the information.
I have my my book ephemeris out in my my study prep area, so it's not my handy reference right now. So you can
Well,
all
maybe we could just give that data, in the next podcast tomorrow that we're going to do podcast. Maybe we could bring that up in the podcast, and especially if it's relevant to that little Cancer stellium over there in the second house.
Well, what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to put a little text box right here where my arrow is and look it up because that's the easiest way, and then it's right there on the PowerPoint
There you go.
slides. By the way, for those of you who follow through, when you get the PDF of the PowerPoint slides, that's where I make any changes before I publish it into a PDF. So if I miss something and I'm going to look up some detail or add some little detail, I will put it into those PowerPoint slides before I do the PDF. So that PDF will many times have a little bit of information to it in addition to what we see on the live broadcast. All right, so if there isn't any comments or questions, then thank you all very much for attending, and I wish you all the best on your spiritual journey to Jupiter retrograde. All right, good night, everyone.